Welcome to another Straight Up Tuesday tip. I'm 𝗤𝘃𝗀𝗀𝗃. With me as always is Mark Ainley. And with us, we are over 5 times for sure, Perry Farella. Perry, how we doing?
Great, thank you. That was a great party at the rooftop a couple weeks ago.
Oh yeah, dude, that was thank you. It's good seeing you there and good seeing a lot of our listeners there. That was an awesome spot. So thank you, Eric Swanson, for hooking us up there.
That's my favorite event so far, just because I didn't leave there losing my voice. I know, but usually we're inside, it's crowded, you got to talk louder, maybe we're challenging music. Like that was the best, man. I got to talk to so many people and feel so good about it just because it wasn't so loud and I wasn't struggling to hear people. I love that venue.
Yeah, I think anytime in Chicago you can be outside. Like we only get so many nice days, utilize it.
We got lucky. We're in between storms too. What a great, that was great. I was happy to have you there, Perry. You're a sponsor. It was great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
looking forward to the next one.
Yeah.
Probably be inside though. Probably be inside.
Yeah, this time it'll be a fall. We'll have to do inside. So,
Right.
so Perry, you work with a lot of investors, both first timers, both experienced. We have a lot of people calling in asking, "Hey, I'm looking to get started. Where do you see first time investors having success?" So we're going to turn that into today's Tuesday tip. So I'll just kind of rephrase it. Where are you seeing first time investors having the most success on that first investment?
Okay, so where I see first-time investors the most successful in my client base is on 3 to 4 unit owner-occupied buildings where they buy with a minimal down payment and they live there for just the first 12 months and they can add renovation dollars if need be. Those buildings will generally cash flow even at lower down payments, especially the 4 unit ones. So for example, a first-time buyer might not have a lot of cash for a big 25% down payment. So now with the changes on the conventional side, a first-time buyer can buy a 2, 3, or 4 unit building with as little as 5% down and also still add renovation dollars if need be. So the requirement would be they live there for the first 12 months, but then if there's 3 or 4 units and they move out, a 4 unit is certainly going to give positive cash flow. A 3 unit should just about pay the entire mortgage. And that's where I see the most success, especially if they can do that repeatedly, meaning that every couple of years they can move on to the next one. And the building will always cash flow once they leave. If it's usually 3 or if it's 4, it'll be really good positive cash flow. We're also starting to see, as we get into the fall now, interest rates beginning to decline, both for conventional and FHA loans, and even for investors. And on the FHA side, you can buy with as little as 3.5% down a 2, 3, or 4 unit building. And the FHA rates are generally going to be lower than conventional rates. And the FHA cost for the monthly mortgage insurance could be the same or even lower than what it might be in a conventional loan, depending upon someone's credit score. So that's why in my client base, I'm seeing the most success as first-time investors go right to the 3 or 4 unit building. The 2 unit buildings will never cash flow, unfortunately. If there's a basement in the future, you may be able to add another unit in the basement. I think the city is going to make that much easier going forward to do that. But right now, the most success is on a 3 or a 4. And that's with minimal down payments, either 3.5% with FHA or 5% down now with conventional.
How do you help people decide which one makes more sense, the FHA or the conventional? Conventional has only been around since the beginning of this year. So outside of putting some more money down, I'm also curious kind of what's wrong with that program, or what's gone wrong, or what's the cons, I guess, with that.
It depends upon the individual buyer. So we look at credit scores. So you can buy with FHA on a multi-unit building and even add renovation dollars with a credit score down to 600, for example. But on the conventional side, the credit score requirements are a little bit higher and the reserve requirements are different. So on the FHA side, if you buy a 3 or 4 unit building, they're going to require 3 months of mortgage payment reserves left over in your account after closing. But on the conventional side, if you buy a 2, 3, or 4 unit building with 5% down, conventional is going to require 6 months of reserves left over after closing in your bank account. So that can be a big difference for a first-time buyer. having all that extra money left over. On the FHA side, FHA will allow the seller to contribute up to 6% of the sale price to pay for all possible closing costs, attorney, first-year insurance, buying down the interest rate, title, lender, et cetera, et cetera. That's a huge advantage. On the conventional side, if you're buying with only 5% down, the most the regulations will allow back from the seller to pay closing costs is just 3%. So those are two very different mathematical models to work with. So what I usually do when someone comes in is we look at it in both ways on a given property. The variables, of course, are going to be what are the rents and what are the property taxes. So we like to weigh both of those before we determine whether it should be FHA or conventional, whether it should be 3.5% down or 5% down, and what is the monthly payment going to be. The other caveat on the FHA side is if you get a 3 or 4 units, FHA is going to want to sort
baby.
yeah, they're going to want to pre-plan for what they would call a self-sufficiency test, or basically pre-planning for a default, because the default rates are higher in those. So basically, if you buy a 3 or 4 unit on FHA side, they're going to want all the rents, including from the owner's apartment, taken at 75% of gross, to at least equal what the total monthly payment is. That way, if they ever have to take over, they rent out the former owner's apartment and they know the building will at least pay for itself. So that's called the self-sufficiency test. Conventional does not have that. That makes conventional a bit easier. So it's almost like putting all these things on a scale to decide what's better, FHA or conventional, and we would look at both.
Yeah, Perry, I think you need to give us a blog with this some sort of a calculator so people can so they can download it on the website and be able to kind of do this pros and cons based on how that calculator kind of works, FHA versus conventional. So that's huge.
That was the most detailed explanation. And the one thing no one talks about is the amount of reserves. Everyone's like, oh, the 5% is great because now I don't have to do self-sufficiency. But now you're doubling up the amount of reserves you need. And if you're buying $1 million property, that's a pretty big payment, and multiplying that by 6, like after you're shelling out, or maybe you're putting in like your own cash to do 50K rehab, like it's missed. Like people talk about it in meetups all the time, and it's missed.
Break down the reserves. What's the reserve requirement? Because maybe I'm not 100% clear on that either, so I imagine other people aren't.
Sure. On the FHA side, it's 3 months of what they call PITI, principal, interest, tax, insurance. But on the conventional side, they raise that to 6 months.
Okay.
Which can be a considerable amount of money. If your payment's $3,000 a month, 3 times 6 is 18, so that's $18,000. You have to have still set aside in your accounts that you didn't spend
after making
on down
5% down payment.
Right.
Gotcha. All right. So here's the $1 million question then. Which loan is easier to get the reno dollars from in the process?
On the conventional side, we have higher loan limits than we do on the FHA side. So we can have much higher loan limits.
Okay.
FHA traditionally is lower loan limits, especially in Cook County and Chicago. So there is also that caveat is that we're going to bump up against the loan maxes if we're at a high price point, plus we have high renovation dollars to add in. So then conventional is going to be more favorable, obviously.
Yeah. But then another scenario, let's just play out a few scenarios here just to make some, you just did people should rewind and listen to that 3 minutes that you just went through, right? But just to make it real and tangible, you have a 610 credit score, like either because you're young or you've messed up in the past. It might be FHA. FHA might be the route for you, right? Even if the calculator is telling you conventional is right, FHA's got a little bit more leniency compared to conventional.
That's true. And the debt to income ratios on FHA can generally be up to about 55% on the back end ratio, lower on the front end ratio. But on the conventional side, the debt to income ratios for loan approvals are generally not going to be much more than about 45% on the back end ratio. So we can borrow more on the FHA side than we can on the conventional side.
A higher ratio.
Right. So FHA has its advantages that we would always take a look at in every scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, the biggest, before the 5% conventional came around, the biggest hurdle with FHA was the self-sufficiency. Because in Chicago, we have high taxes, property values are high. And if you're looking in a neighborhood, it's hard to pass that self-sufficiency test when you're buying a building that has below market rents or vintage, a vintage apartment that has rents, unless you've done some work and bumped those up, it gets tricky to get to that 75%.
Yeah, it does. So that's why everyone loves this new conventional option at low down payments. But what I have found sometimes is that because the debt to income ratios are lower on conventional approvals, we end up going up to a 15% down payment anyway on the conventional side, just because we have to stop at around 45% debt to income ratio. So it's always going to be doing the analysis for both sides.
Yeah. One takeaway from this too is like when you're going to look for a lender, like these are the conversations to have, man. Like don't just get a term sheet and say, all right, cool, I'm doing this. Like whether you're going with Perry or you're going with someone, like these are the conversations to figure out like, all right, what am I really able to afford? What am I really able to do? Especially if you've never done it before.
Yeah, your lender's got to be sitting down with you or walking you through this process and the pros and cons of each, like we just did. And that's probably one of the key attributes to who you work with to make sure that those things are in place.
Yeah, and the other thing is we need an honest representation of what are the rents going to be, especially on an empty vacant building. After you renovate it, the appraiser will tell us what the expected after renovated rent should be. And then in either FHA or conventional, you can take up to 75% of that and add it as extra income to qualify. But where I see people make mistakes is buildings that, while they're for sale, for whatever reason, the owner seller just decided to lock in new leases and they're at lower market rates. Then we're all stuck. Someone's locked in for another year on a lease at lower market rent. We can only take 75% of that, even though the rent should be up here, it's down here. That's the reality. And that could short circuit a lot of deals when we are locked in with these long leases and lower market rate rents, unfortunately.
Yeah, great call out. Quick comment on that too, just to get on the legal side. If you're putting something under contract that's month to month, that attorney review letter better state that they are not allowed to renew any sort of leases.
Yes.
If you don't explicitly call that out, I know we had Chance, our B-Beck, one of our lawyers on here to talk about that. If you don't explicitly call that out and they do that, like they've just screwed you for the year. So make sure that is in your attorney review letter. Not to get off the topic of lending, but you brought it up along the lines there. So I wanted to make sure it gets out there.
No, that's good advice. And, again, if I talk to you about the most successful clients, they find the empty derelict buildings or they find the estate sales where all the family members are moving out and they're going to have a clean slate to start with. They can set the rents at market rate rents. The appraiser comes in and gives that projection. We'll take it right off the appraisal, 75%, no problem. It's always better to buy a building that's not tied up with tenant leases, in my opinion. I did have a client close last week purely as an investor on a 2-unit in Berwyn, where there are some really good values I've noticed on 2 and 3, 4 unit buildings. He bought a 2-unit for $355 with 25% down as an investor. He'll never live there. He's going to add some renovation dollars. His mortgage payment is a little over $3K a month, but by the time he's done with his improvements, he should be getting rents that will more than pay for the mortgage and also generate some appreciation as time goes on. And this is his second building in Berwyn as an investor. So Berwyn is an area, if you ask me a question, where people should consider looking outside of Chicago. I would suggest Berwyn. There's a lot of great housing stock. Some of it needs to be renovated. Some of it already has been. Berwyn also is easier on allowing the addition of a basement apartment typically. So there's always a potential to add another apartment there. So that's where I've been seeing people look if you're asking me about what is the best place to look right now.
Man, you gotta keep that quiet. John Warren's gonna be mad at you. That's his stomping grounds over there. So, all right, Perry, this is awesome content. Mark, anything to add?
That's it. It's a wrap.
All right, we got a Chicago fact. So I know Perry and FCM are sponsoring this, but who are we playing for?
All right, we're playing for 𝗦𝘃𝗲𝗀 Rogers, who bought something off the straight up Chicago investor merch store. And our sponsor today, obviously, is Perry Farella at First Community Mortgage.
All right. So if either of you get this right, you're going to have a 50% shot. So I used to see Perry all the time at the Irving and Damon Starbucks there. I know that's you like to work out of there, and I have a couple buildings right in the area. So our question's coffee related today. So according to ChatGPT, which is definitely a reliable source, roughly how many cups of coffee are consumed within the city of Chicago during the course of an entire year? So during the course of an entire year, home brewed, buying at the store, how many cups of coffee are consumed? This is like a question to get into Harvard, where they're just testing how you can think. So your options are over the course of an entire year: 100 million, 400 million, 850 million, 1.2 billion.
I'm gonna go with 1.2 billion.
All right, Perry, you gotta think, you think it's if you think it's 1.2, you gotta take a shot at something else. Double the chances.
Yeah, I'm gonna go a little bit lower. What was the next lowest one?
800. 850. I would have said 850, but I thought, no, I'm undershooting it.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with 850.
850 is right, according to ChatGPT.
Nice.
Which equates to almost 2.3 million cups per day.
Yeah, which means an average of one per person, pretty much, right?
Well,
In
yeah,
this-
but like half of them are kids, right?
Yeah,
So
but
it's
that's
like
average, though. That's average.
Like for the adult
But-
is two.
Dude, the kids are drinking coffee though. Like my daughter hit Starbucks on her way to her freshman year in high school now. Like the kids are, we never drank coffee in high school. The kids are doing that now, so it's even lower. Nice job, Perry, getting that question right. Kylan, you got a $50 gift card brought to you by First Community Mortgage and Perry Farella, today's guest. Listeners, check out Perry is on Build Your Team if you're interested in talking to lenders, inspectors, lawyers, tax contesting, cost seg, and more. Anything you're going to need as part of your team to buy your first property or your 10th property. These are all vendors that we've worked with, Tom and I have worked with. We've ultimately probably came across after we failed with a bunch of other vendors that are definitely not on our list. So check it out, straightupchicagoinvestor.com. Build Your Team page right on the homepage. And Perry, thank you for coming on. Tom, thank you. Listeners, we'll see you
Thank you.
Thursday.
Thanks all.